Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Historians Lounge here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I'm your host, Gabriel Garcia. Many of you know me as the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill. And joining us today is a historian making their official debut here on the show. Now, our guest today is an historian specializing in public history, historic preservation, and anything history. He has worked in several museums as an assistant curator, worked within archaeological teams in the Southeastern United States, and he is always looking for a role to promote himself as an historian and is always eager to push himself in the professional field of history. And I'm so excited to have this guest on the show because we are going to be talking about a particular topic in the realm of food history. So, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's give a huge round of applause to our guest today, historian James Binzen. James, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you. So, where do you want to start off? Do you want to start off with Prohibition or beforehand?
Well, I think it would be good tonight to set up, leading up to Prohibition. But before we dive into that, I want to give you the floor, James, to introduce yourself to the viewers, the audience, and give a little background about yourself as an historian. And also, what about this topic is so fascinating?
So, I'm based out of Middle Tennessee, just south of Nashville. The area I live in is really known for history. If anyone has read Song of the South, a very famous Civil War book that is based on my hometown, not very historically accurate at all, very romanticized, but that is one of the things my town is known for. The other thing is Miley Cyrus. She went to school with my cousins and a bunch of other stuff, but my degree is public history. I specialize in preservation, museums, and I touch in archaeology a little bit. I was an archaeologist and still am. I'm on teams every once in a while whenever I can find a group. But I did my field school out in Italy. I took a bunch of classes out in Italy as well. Loved doing that. Worked on an Etruscan site. Then I went back for a class the following year. Absolutely beautiful country. I love northern Italy. Besides that, I focus mostly in the Southeast United States. I always say I'm a food and war historian. Technically, I study empires, but food and war it sounds cooler in my opinion.
It does. It really, really does. And for this topic, as we're going to be talking about, I think there's a lot of history behind it. So I guess let's sort of paint a picture leading up to Prohibition. And I'm very eager to hear insight into this, James, with our first question, which is, starting with, colonial America, many people have been immortalized by the notion of, rum from like Pirates of the Caribbean, but rum was not like the sole alcoholic beverage of choice. There was many others. So what were the different types of alcoholic beverages consumed in colonial America, and how did their popularity vary between region?
So depending on the region, I focus really in the South. In the South, you're going to get a lot more grogs. Which is rum and water, a little bit of lime juice. That you're going to get more from the sailor tradition, especially along the coastal United States. But depending on the area, especially here in the South, a lot of our founding fathers, they made rye whiskey, they made wheat whiskey, and a lot of other kinds of like harder liquors. Besides that, you have up in the Northeast, you have a lot of wine. A lot of grapes were imported. So up around New York, you're going to have the grow zones for a lot of the kind of Central European, the Northern Italian, Northern Spanish kinds of grapes. It's a perfect climate adaptation right through that area right between New England to around Pennsylvania. Middle Tennessee also has this kind of perfect grow zone as well. It's a 9A to 9B grow zone. So you're going to get a lot of variety of grapes that grow really well in these kind of areas. Middle Tennessee is not really known for its grape wines. We're known more for our fruit wines, especially raspberry. Down the road from me is Arno Vineyards off of Arno Road. Really good fruit wine. Not my favorites. I love Italian wines, but I'm a little bit of a snob when it comes to alcohol. But a lot of it you're going to get, it's going to be hard liquors. You're going to have a lot of beers, especially early on, you're going to get ales.
Yes.
So around 1840, way past colonial period, that's when you start getting German beers, lagers, Hefeweizens, pale ales. That's when you're going to get that huge change in demographics, especially with beer. But beforehand, it's going to be almost entirely ales. You're going to get British lagers, reds. You're going to see a lot of that Scots-Irish influence in your alcohol. And you can still kind of see, especially with like Samuel Adams, those are still kind of traditionally made. But a lot of those survived Prohibition. A lot of the German companies survived as well, especially if they were in the Midwest. But those early ones, it's mostly going to be Scots-Irish beers, whiskeys. You're going to have the grog, rum from the sailors, all the influences from the Caribbean coming up, because the Caribbean was a lot more prominent in that period, especially food-wise. So you're going to have a bunch of stuff coming up from the Caribbean. That's also how you get like barbecue, jerky. A lot of Southern food has that Caribbean influence in it that you can still kind of see today, especially with barbecue. Early alcohols, and still in like Miami, you have mixed drinks. You also see like mixed drinks and cocktails during that time as well, especially for like house parties with governors. And that goes into the founding fathers as well.
Absolutely. Well said, James. Well said. And you kind of tease on this a little bit with, the transition period with, a lot of the immigration we get into the 1840s. So going still into, the early colonial period, how did these early American settlers' backgrounds and their cultures influence the drinking habits of the various regions, as well as brewing techniques? Because as you mentioned, if you look in the South, it is this. If you look in the Northeast, it is this. So it's very, very distinct.
So the best way I'm going to explain this is I went to Colorado back 2019, right before COVID started. And to me, everything in Denver tastes like Coors. If you go around to different spots, you're going to have different kinds of water. You're going to have different minerals in the water. And for a long time, even still today in some parts of the world, you ferment your water with yeast and different sugars to get a clean drink. Alcohol is the production of that, but early America really relies on this before you can get clean wells, juices, milks. And depending on where you are, depending on what you can grow, you can make alcohol out of anything. A lot of it's going to be wine, fruit wines, meads, especially with honey. Meads kind of come later. They kind of die out in the middle after that early colonial expansion where we start getting set up. You kind of see it there, then you kind of see it a little bit later. You see it sprinkled in it, the middle. But once Scandinavians, Northern Europeans start moving to the United States and immigration, you start seeing it pick back a little bit more. Doesn't get as popular. Another one that I really should have mentioned was ciders.
Yes.
Ciders, I completely forgot about it. I have it up on my other screen because I was just looking through a bunch of my old capstone projects. That's where you start seeing a lot of varieties of apple trees start coming out of. A lot of them went extinct during Prohibition. Because of Prohibition, they went out and cut down apple trees, but that's where you see a lot of variety in our apples expand here in the United States. is
Absolutely.
colonial period going up until about the 1840s.
Hmm. And as you mentioned before, you had, ales, you had rum, you had whiskey, and then of course you have ciders. But I'm very curious, when beer was first introduced into the Americas, how did that change the consumption when compared to, whiskey, rum, and ales, which had already had a foothold in colonial America?
So any hard liquor is going to be able to be preserved. That's why rum is used instead of beer. Beer will go bad over time. But whiskey is essentially just beer without the hops and distilled. So it's the extra processing. So over here, when you make it, you don't have to put it into a still. You don't have to go through these extra processes. And it's a lot easier to make than whiskey. So that's probably going to get up on the ground first. Then it's going to grow and grow. Once you start seeing stills, that's when you start seeing whiskeys and moonshines. That's when you start seeing all of those coming forward, probably reusing original casks that were brought over on ships until you get your actual barrel makers. The name, their official title just is slipping my mind right now. But those early guys, you're going to be making beers and wines mostly.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, once you get stills set up, you're going to be making those. But it's all up to preference and taste. So, yeah, you might have similar grains all throughout the colonies. They're all going to be coming from the same place. It's up north, you're going to get a little bit more French influence. Down south, you're going to get more Spanish and Portuguese influence. But through most of it, you're going to get that Scots-Irish influence for taste. And that's really where it's going to stick out.
Fascinating.
And almost all of that's going to come in. As I said, it comes from where the people came from. That's where all of those tastes and flavors are going to come from. And they're just going to taste slightly different because of where they are. So geography really plays a major key factor in this. The water quality, what's in the water. Here in Tennessee, we have a lot of lime in our water. But to me, that improves the flavor, especially of beers. A lot of the local beers, especially traditional lager. I love the taste of those. Coors, I think I drank way too much of that. It's not my favorite anymore. I don't drink it anymore, but Samuel Adams is a really good, maybe third or fourth for me.
All right. I like it. I like it. And I think what's also very important to talk about is, something that's always been synonymous with, beers and alcohols is tavern culture as well, because we always see it in movies. It always gives like an opinion. And then from tavern culture, we get into, saloon culture, or we see in the Westerns. So in your opinion, how did the tavern culture develop in the 18th and early 19th centuries? And what functions did these taverns serve? And then, of course, on the offshoot, the evolution of the saloon.
So I'm going to start a little earlier than that in the colonial period. There was a book focused about the revolution. It was focused about taverns, prostitutes, and pirates.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's close to the name of it. But these are your social hubs for a lot of the people. You're going to have a few different kinds of social hubs. You're going to have your churches. You're going to have your town gatherings, your town meetings. But saloons and churches, saloons, taverns, bars, whatever you want to call them, they essentially all serve the same function. And churches, they both kind of hold this predominant place in people's hearts. They're where you go to, and later during Prohibition, this changed to ice cream shops. Really weird for ice cream to be the next alcohol, but going into it, they are these social hubs. This is where you meet your friends, family. This is where you might meet your future wife, husband. For the upper class, you have higher class establishments. You go serve your social function role there, and then more reclusive places. This is also where you get brothels,
Yes.
cabarets, gambling dens. early America, this is where you go for your social life. This is where you go to move up. This is where you meet your people, you network, and you grow. As you start pushing it out west, this is where, again, you socialize, you meet people, you get into fights. A lot of bars in history, some of the most famous ones would be the one just down the hill from West Point. Then you have all the things out in Oklahoma, even like tea shops and stuff. A lot of them also sold alcohol, especially at night. They're your social hubs. They are where people go to meet. Almost every famous person has probably been in one, probably met their friends there. Go to Philadelphia, go to New York, Boston. Almost every founding father is going to have a bar or a famous bar that had something signed in it. Civil War, even. You have so many things with bars. A lot of soldiers met in bars. A lot of officers met in bars. That's where you know each other from. That's how you got recruited into the military in some cases. That's how you got press ganged in the ships. And a lot of that still happened up until about 1814 with that war.
Mm-hmm. Well said. And it is very true, because you're absolutely right, because bars, and like if you look in movies from, like, saloons in the Wild West to, bars or speakeasies, either in LA or in the other cities, they're a social hub. They are a place of like meetings, friends. And if you've seen like those older war movies from the 30s and
Washington, or young Washington, half of that took place in a bar or one of the higher class cabarets.
Yes, cabarets.
I can't think of the Mel Gibson movie, The Patriot.
Oh, yes.
Half the people he recruited were from a bar. And I know we're going into more fiction stuff with Pirates of the Caribbean. Where do you recruit all your friends? The bar.
Yes, absolutely. Very, very true. And then this kind of leads into something that we're going to be touching on much later when we get to, Prohibition, is, how do you tax, alcohols during the early period? So in your work, in your research, James, what were the legal regulations surrounding the early production sale of alcohol in the colonial period?
There wasn't much. So essentially, taxing something like that is going to be nearly impossible. Almost everything was home brewed or locally sourced. People make it out back in their barns. Beer you make in your cellar, you keep it nice and cold, around 50, 60 degrees. So a root cellar is perfect for your fermentation cycle. You can even do ales in 70 degrees. Like my house is 70 degrees. That's where I do all my fermentation. So find a nice cold corner of your house. That's how you just make beer. You find any receptacle and you put stuff in it. Mix it up, heat it up to get all the starches out, strain it to get all the solids out, a little bit of yeast, and it sets. So regulation is extremely hard. There was a few small little skirmishes, especially really early on. There was a whiskey tax that got put in like before the Constitution got made, and that did not go well. Colonial period. They tried a lot of times to put taxes, especially on rum, because a lot of rum was still imported. Georgia has a thriving rum business now. A place called Richland Rum, created by Jimmy Carter and a bunch of his friends. Really suggest looking them up. They have a place in Brunswick, Georgia, which is where my mom's side of the family's from. And I talked to their owner a bunch because I was talking about original distillation and aging processes on ships to get that saltier flavor. But yeah, regulation's going to be almost non-existent for a long time. You're going to have laws, you're going to have taxes on it, but you can't really enforce a lot of that unless if you look at larger distilleries, larger vineyards, wineries, and breweries. Those are really the people that are going to be regulated. Almost everything else is going to be a bar that makes their own beer up in the attic or down in the root cellar. And you can't really restrict or do anything there.
It's true. Absolutely. Very true.
A lot of those restrictions really started probably right before Prohibition. So 1900 is right when you start seeing the Prohibition movement start. It's like 1890 to 1900.
Absolutely.
That's where you start seeing more and more things ramp up, especially tax-wise and restriction-wise.
Very true. And, you know, the Prohibition is definitely a huge, huge cultural moment in U.S. history of how that changes, you know, the consumption of alcohol, the taxation of alcohol, the banning of alcohol, and how, as we'll probably touch on later, how criminal organizations profited off of the import and export of alcohol. But before we get to that, I would like to hear your thoughts on, you know, something like the earliest, the earliest movements, not movements, but moments in U.S. history, that being, you know, still in the colonial period, the American Revolution, and then, of course, the Whiskey Rebellion of 1794. How did that change, you know, the regulation and consumption of alcohols and beers in the U.S.?
So a lot of that time, really consumption didn't change in that period. Regulations really didn't change. They tried taxing here and there, and you can't really regulate or do anything about any of that. So life for most people just continued on. Really, the big change in tastes and consumptions that would happen during the migrant waves. So until Prohibition, you don't really look at alcohol through penal codes or restrictions or tariffs. You of course have like foreign exports and imports that are regulated. Those are going to be a lot more regulated compared to your homegrown industry or homegrown manufacturers. Home brewing and home stilling are widely popular in my county that I live in, Williamson County, Tennessee. Along the Harpeth River, which is the river that my neighborhood runs along, there was 263 stills before Prohibition along the river. And I don't know what year that came off of. I want to say it was 1896 or sometime around there. I would have to look at Tennessee Library and Archives again to try finding that exact statistic, but I know the number was 263 stills on the Harpeth River, and that was in Williamson County alone. The Harpeth River is one of the tributaries of the Cumberland River, and it goes all the way up till Clarksville, essentially, which is the other side of Nashville.
Okay. And then kind of now moving in time a little bit, as we go into now the industrial age, you know, we have the rise of, you know, steam engines, trains later in history. And then with these technological innovations for like factories, you also have new evolutions in brewing technology. So during this period of the U.S., how does that change, you know, the creation of new alcohols and beers, as well as the transportation of everything that's on the East Coast to the West Coast once the Western states are fully a part of the U.S.?
So there's two main inventions: one, refrigeration; two, trains. And this isn't really an invention, but immigration. So immigration had a huge part in bringing new techniques in. 1840s, you have German immigrants, you have Czech immigrants, you have Pilsners or pale ales. You have lagers, Hefeweizens, you have imperial stouts coming from Germany. You have all of these different kinds of Southern German influences, specifically Southern German and Czechia. And a lot of that's going to set up along the Mississippi River. Mississippi River at the time, especially the northern part, it's going to be really clean water. And a lot of them are still around today. Prohibition killed a lot of the factories, but the main one that most people knew before Prohibition was LEMP, L-E-M-P. Essentially, St. Louis, Missouri, right across the street from the other major, I want to say it's not Budweiser. Yeah, it might be Budweiser. I can't think of it, but LEMP was stationed out of St. Louis, Missouri, and it could go either way. It could go west, it could go east. Trains could make a product that lasted 2-3 weeks at most, beer, go all the way across the country in a few days. So that improved transportation quality. Refrigeration was the next one. So beer being able to be stored, beer goes bad after a few weeks. So you have beer coming from St. Louis, it's going out west, it's going east, and these factories continue to grow and grow. Beforehand, your large breweries were mostly focused around cities. So you'll have 1 or 2 per city. They'll focus on that city and the surrounding area. After trains, that area gets a little bit larger. Refrigeration, it's all across the country. You're going to have your major LEMP being one of the ones that was the biggest, it was the earliest, and one of the most famous. A lot of it kind of came back after Prohibition for a little while, but it never got back to its point. And some of our grandparents, sorry if you hear my corgi, he's whining in the other room because I think someone's home. But but LEMP, some of my grandfather knew what LEMP was. He was born right before Prohibition, didn't fight in World War II, fought in Korea, but he knew what LEMP was. And that is kind of the standard that I go to is LEMP. There's a bunch of recreations. Their old factory is still there. You can find kind of the descendants of the family because all of these like big name brands, they're all coming from the 1840s. Budweiser, even Coors came from the 1840s. Going out west, especially Colorado. Colorado had a huge industry, especially with brewing. Milwaukee was another. Anything in Wisconsin to Missouri is going to have a huge beer industry in it. Tennessee had a thriving beer industry. Nashville Brewery. There's actually Yazoo has the name of the Nashville Brewery. The Gerst name, which was a huge name here in Nashville for a long time. The Gerst House was a restaurant up in Nashville over by the Titan Stadium. It came here in 1840. It's since gone out of business. Yazoo got the name. They did not get the recipe. I believe Nashville Brewery has the recipe, and that is one of my favorite beers to this day.
Ooh, fascinating. Well, thank you for sharing that, James. Thank you. Thank you. Now, you kind of already talked about a little bit of, some of the major factors that led to, the next stage in the evolution of alcohols and beers in the United States with, immigration probably being a big factor with especially the rise or the introduction of the Germans and the southern German states, as well as Eastern Europeans coming into the United States, as well as the Irish as well. And also very fascinating is, the introduction of lagers in the 1880s as well, and the new beer. And one thing I really would like to hear your thoughts on, what are some lesser known factors that also contributed to this next wave, this next evolutionary stage of beers and alcohols in the United States as we go into the 1880s, 1890s, at the dawn of the 20th century?
So as you're going into the dawn of the 20th century, you're going to have more immigrant waves, especially from Eastern Europe. The other thing that really kind of focuses on is the kind of grains used and the kinds of yeasts. Everyone had their tastes. A lot of beers made with barley, but you start getting wheat beers. You're going to get more variety. Germany has a very tight hold on what kind of beers you can make, and they still have a lot of those laws from 1516, the German beer laws. So getting them to experiment more, you have all of these beer cultures that have grown in the United States, and you don't really see a lot of change, but once more Eastern Europeans, Irish already had that culture ingrained, especially in places like Chicago, New York, places where you have a lot of Scots-Irish influence. When the Irish moved there, they really imposed the imperial stout Guinness and Irish imports.
Mm-hmm.
You also have a lot of Irish whiskey as well. Then down in the South, it's a stranglehold still. Just came out of the Civil War, going into Reconstruction. It's still going to be your traditionals. A lot in the South has not changed. You have your German immigrant families from the 1840s. They're ingrained there, but that's where you start seeing Prohibition prop up, is in the South. Tennessee had a 1 mile law where you can't make, sell, or distribute alcohol within a mile of a school. And that eventually got so bad to where there was only one point in the state where you could sell alcohol, and that was a hilltop that the owner of the hilltop did not know that they were selling alcohol, and he was a huge prohibitionist. He found out and just shut that down instantly. So essentially all of Tennessee was dry, and we still have dry counties here in Tennessee today. Some states still have dry counties. But a lot of, going back to the question, a lot of that change that you see, it's going to be culture shock. And a lot of that's going to happen in the Midwest and West. Northeast and the South, they're ingrained cultures. Not a lot's going to change. A lot of the changes that are happening now are happening in major cities, and that's the IPA revolution, and that started to die down as well today. But almost every change you see is going to be when a major immigration shift has occurred.
Absolutely. Well said again, James. Well said. So now as we move into the beginnings of the 20th century, let's talk about probably the biggest thing what's tied to the history of alcohol and beer, and that is the temperance movement. Now, there were many across the United States history, especially towards the later half of the 19th century into the 20th century. And from your research, how did temperance movements start to gain momentum in the United States? And what was their primary argument against alcohol consumption? Because there's been a lot of arguments, but what was like the main one, their main driving force?
I mean, you could throw a dart at a board and you could pick an answer out of that. A lot of that was religious preference, anti-Catholic sentiments, especially during that time. You have a lot of Irish, South Germans, uh, Eastern Europeans. So it's going to be a lot of anti-Catholicism coming in because you have sacraments with wine compared to grape juice or other less alcoholic ways that Protestants, especially Anglican, Southern Baptist, a lot of this you're going to see in the South, especially Louisiana, New Orleans area, where it's that mix of Catholic and Protestant. You're going to see it out west, California, Texas, Colorado. You're going to get these confrontations between Catholics and Protestants. Tennessee's my area of specialty, especially with this issue. It's Catholics versus Protestants. Again, it's the Protestant main base is starting to see alcohol. You're going to see it a lot in women as well. Women are going to be the major deciding factor in this.
Nice.
Those are the two key demographics that I see that are in the temperance movement. You're going to have a lot of women. They want freedom. They want growth. They want a nicer, cleanlier household. They see their men coming back from work, getting drunk, and they don't like that. Then, on the other hand, you have the anti-Catholic movements that are happening in the United States during this period. It doesn't really help the fact that a lot of the people pushing this are also women and priests that are trying to get these Catholics out, especially Irish. A lot of Irish people are kind of in the middle of this, going Irish and Italian. I should not forget the Italians in this at all. You see this kind of turn into the different mafias. A lot of these marginalized groups begin their own sentiments for their own distinctive areas, and this is getting into prohibition, but this is really the force of it. In the South, yeah, you have Protestants that drink quite a bit. That's how you get whiskey. That's how you get NASCAR. Because of prohibition in the South, but a lot of it's going to be Catholics and women.
And speaking of women, something that I found very interesting is that something that's not mentioned is the role women played in the brewing industry and alcohol consumption prior to prohibition. So I was wondering if you can share some insight into that aspect.
Women are at the house a lot of the time, especially with smaller families. Brewing early on, before it became a massive industry that had breweries in Nashville, St. Louis, just any major city you can think of, it happened at home. And still, even until Prohibition, it happened in the home, especially farmhouses. So all of these women, this is where you're going to get a lot of your variety. They're all going to have their own recipes. All these recipes are going to be passed down. And you're going to have a different beer for every occasion, essentially. So you're going to have Christmas beer. You're going to have a 4th of July beer, 4th of July being one of the bigger holidays in the year for most Americans until Prohibition. Then 1950s, Christmas starts getting bigger. But early on, you're going to get this seasonal beer. You're going to have your lagers for your winter, hardier, darker beers. During the summer, you're going to have your ales, these lighter, more refreshing beers. Throughout the rest of the season, you're going to see pine and different kind of sodas that are essentially a bunch of things you forage and you put into a bottle and it auto ferments. That's how you get pine needle soda. Really suggested it tastes like Sprite.
Ooh, interesting. Very, very interesting. And one thing I also found very fascinating is, as we get into, in the, the roaring 20s before we get to the passing of the Prohibition Act, I was wondering if you could talk about, especially for Tennessee during this period leading up to Prohibition, what are some of like the social and economic factors that contributed to the perception of alcohol as a problem in American society?
Again, this is going to go to relations between immigrants and local people. It's going to be anti-Catholic movements. It's going to be women in home wanting their husbands to be less drunk, less erratic, going out to bars. So it's in Tennessee, as I mentioned earlier, Tennessee was essentially a dry state by 1920. By the time Prohibition hit, Tennessee was dry. A lot of the South was dry already. You could still have like the eventual saloon or bar throughout the entire state, but a lot of that's going to be underground by this point.
That is
Everywhere
very true.
else, you're going to see all of that stuff throughout. You're going to have drinking in cabarets. Boardwalk Empire, if you've ever seen that show, the first episode, Prohibition goes up, and what do? They make a toast with a bunch of alcohol. So, Prohibition was really for the poor people. The growing middle class. The rich people didn't care; they could get alcohol. They had their stashes. Anything before Prohibition went up that you had in your house, you could keep. You could homebrew. You could not make things for other people. And when I say homebrew, you can make it for medicinal purposes only. You can get medicine licenses, and that's how some larger distilleries stayed around, was they started making alcohol for medicine. And then you sell a little bit on the side. And criminal industries, that's what you would do. You would get a medical license and then sell all your stuff to your guy down on 6th Street in a speakeasy.
Yep, that is very true.
South, that's how you get NASCAR, outrunning police. Racing in general started essentially because you wanted to soup up your cars for the best kind of trafficking you can. Got to get as much out of your warehouses, out of your factories, your breweries. You have to get from point A to point B without getting caught. You're going to see a huge cultural revolution happen because of this. And a lot of those stayed because it's the 1920s, it's the roaring 20s. A lot of people see all of these events as nostalgic. So you start making sports, you start making tournaments, competitions. It becomes a part of daily life. When it gets repealed, all of those things stuck. And all of the changes, all of the ways to get around alcohol, because a lot of people, a lot of the bars that were more prominent in towns turned into ice cream shops. A lot of the same equipment used in making beer at the time was what you made early ice cream out of. Early refrigeration. Everyone likes it. You already have your stools set up. Just make it a little more flashy. And now kids can come in and have fun as well.
Absolutely. And it is very interesting when you look at like the history of like alcohol and beer in the United States that we've talked about in this episode. It is very interesting to, see the evolution and seeing the distinctions and the distilling processes for, for whiskey, for rum, for ale. And then you go into like, the wine, and then you have the ciders as well. And then of course you talk a little bit about, moonshine also became a huge thing when Prohibition took up. I remember the film Lawless with Shia LaBeouf, and that history, how that family made their living off of moonshine and selling to the local criminal organizations in their area. So the history of beer and the history of alcohol is very interesting because it's tied to, as we've talked about, different cultural movements, immigration, new technologies, new practices in brewing, and the perceptions of alcohol and rum. And I think really to wrap this really great discussion up, James, what can people take away from this discussion of the history of alcohol and beer in the United States prior to Prohibition?
You can look at it with pretty much any substance that's been uh, restricted. Weed is a huge popular one. Politically, you can look at it. My personal favorite is preservation. So a lot of those trees that got that cut down and made extinct during Prohibition, a few of them were found. The Harrison apple tree being one of them. You can actually get a breeding pair or a breeding trio of these apples that have been thought destroyed for almost a century. About 2 decades ago, Paul Guides and Tom Buford found two different trees, planted them near each other, and through that started an orchard. Thankfully, they only needed the two. Typically, for apple trees, you need three, a breeding trio, not a pair. So it's the preservation. Beer and food in general is a cultural necessity for so many people, especially here in the United States of European descent and even Asian descent. Asians brought their own alcohols. You have soju, you have rice wines. The 1850s really brought a lot of people together. I completely forgot about the West Coast side of things because I'm so focused on the East Coast, but the West Coast has so much because of Chinese cultures coming in.
Mm-hmm.
Chinese, Korean, Southeast Asian. Around the 1870s, you start getting Japanese influences in, where you get your whiskeys with flowers in it, with your aromatics, your herbals. That's where you start getting your mixed beers. Your early IPAs, I would like to say, really came from the West Coast during the 1850s, 1870s with the Chinese, Japanese immigrants.
Mm-hmm.
And beer and really any food is just a cultural experience. And today, I love fusion food. I love looking at beers. IPAs aren't my favorite. I love traditional lager. That's the German in me. My last name's German. I love my traditional beers, but food is such a cultural thing and it connects so many people. So
Yes,
you
it
get to
does.
see how connecting small little things are in history. Every small little thing has 100 people behind it. Every small event, everything you do, my computer has 100 people behind it, and I bet every one of them has an awesome history behind it. That
Mm-hmm.
is my philosophy with history: is we're all a part of it, and we just have to preserve it and see it last the next day.
Well said, James. Well said. And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, we conclude another episode of the Historians Lounge here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I want to give a huge thank you to James for coming on the show, making his official debut. And I'd like to see James back on the show again in a historian interview to learn more about his background and his journey in the field of history. Like this video, comment down below, and subscribe to the channel. And most of all, share with friends and family. James, thank you so very much for coming on the show. Where can people find you if they wanted to reach out and connect?
So LinkedIn is always a great place. I do actually have a YouTube video that I made in conjunction of my thesis. It's not the greatest video, but it was my first time really attempting it. James Eco on YouTube. But LinkedIn's probably the easiest way to find me. or my email.
Awesome. I will link all that down below in the description of this video. Thank you everyone for joining us for another amazing episode here on the channel. A huge thank you to James for coming on the show. Wishing him the very best from one historian to another. And until
Thank
next
you.
time, you're welcome, James. And until next time, ladies and gentlemen, this has been the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill signing out. Wish you all a wonderful Friday wherever you are in the world. Have a wonderful day, everybody. And we'll see you all in the next episode.